The lights inside the Beverly Hilton ballroom dimmed to a golden glow, and in that suspended hush before history, time itself seemed to inhale. On May 9, 1983, the air was thick with legends, diamonds, and destiny. The band struck the opening note and James Brown stepped into the light, sharp, electric, unstoppable. In the shadows, a young man in a sequin jacket stood motionless, watching, heart pounding. His name was Michael Jackson. The crowd erupted, but Michael Jackson didn't move. He couldn't. What he was witnessing wasn't just a performance, it was perfection in motion. And in the next few seconds, everything about performance art would change forever. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you never miss another untold story. This was not just a birthday party. This was a coronation, a celebration of 50 years of fire and funk, of sweat and soul of the man who taught the world how to dance with authority, James Brown. The ballroom at the Beverly Hilton was packed with the biggest names in music, film, and culture. Smokey Robinson, Stevie Wonder, Diana Ross, Quincy Jones. They were all there not as celebrities but as witnesses. Because when James Brown took the stage, you didn't just watch, you experienced. And standing just off stage, watching like a student before a master, was Michael Jackson, already the biggest star on earth. Thriller was dominating every chart, every radio station, every living room. He had just changed pop music forever with one album. But that night, he wasn't the king of pop. He was a fan, a disciple, a dancer learning from the originator. James Brown didn't walk onto that stage. He attacked it. Every step snapped with purpose. Every movement cut through the air like a blade. His suit shimmered under the lights, but it was his body that commanded the room. The band followed him like a living organism, responding to his footwork, his shouts, his gestures. He wasn't just performing music. He was conducting electricity. The audience clapped on beat, shouted, screamed, lost themselves. But Michael Jackson was silent, eyes locked, breath held. He was watching every detail, the precision of James's foot placement, the way he pivoted without effort, the way his body seemed to defy gravity while still obeying rhythm. This wasn't just dance. This was control. This was mastery. Then it happened. James Brown executed a spin. Not just any spin. It was impossibly smooth. So fluid it didn't look like movement, it looked like reality folding in on itself. 1 second James was facing forward, the next he was. There was no visible effort, no tension, no struggle, just perfection. A rotation so clean, so seamless that it felt like time skipped a frame. And in that moment, Michael Jackson stopped dancing. He didn't shift his weight, he didn't tap his foot, he didn't nod his head. His body froze, his eyes widened, and something inside him changed forever. This was not admiration. This was awe. This was the realization that perfection exists, and he had just witnessed it. Later, those close to him would say he stopped breathing for a second. Because when you witness perfection, you don't compete with it. You transcend it. That spin didn't just stun Michael Jackson. It broke him open. Up to that moment, Michael had spent his life studying James Brown. As a child in Gary, Indiana, he had watched grainy television performances, mimicking every step, every shout, every drop to the floor. James Brown was his blueprint, his North Star, his standard. But on May 9, 1983, at the Beverly Hilton, Michael Jackson realized something devastating and liberating at the same time. He could never out-James Brown. And for the first time in his life, he didn't want to. The applause roared. James finished his set in triumph. The room stood in ovation. And somewhere in the wings, a young man in a sequin jacket remained frozen, staring into the future. Because that spin wasn't just a dance move. It was a challenge. And what Michael Jackson did in the next 3 months would shock the music industry, redefine performance art, and change the way the world understood movement, rhythm, and imagination. But he didn't respond by copying. He responded by creating something no one had ever seen. He created the moonwalk. But that story doesn't begin on television. It begins in silence. After the celebration ended, after the lights dimmed, after the last champagne glass was cleared, Michael Jackson returned to his private world. Not to celebrate, not to rest, but to think. Those who knew him best said he became quiet, withdrawn, obsessive. He replayed the moment in his mind over and over again, the spin, the control, the perfection. He wasn't jealous, he wasn't defeated. He was inspired. Because Michael Jackson didn't want to be the best dancer. He wanted to create something that had never existed. In his home, in rehearsal studios, in empty rooms late at night, he began experimenting, not with copying James Brown's moves, but with breaking them apart. He studied the mechanics of walking. He studied gravity. He studied illusion. He studied how the human eye perceives motion and how to trick it. He wasn't trying to move forward. He was trying to move backward, but not in the normal way. He wanted to walk while appearing to glide. He wanted to move while appearing still. He wanted to defy physics without breaking it. This wasn't choreography. This was invention. And invention takes obsession. Michael Jackson practiced alone for hours, sometimes entire nights. His feet blistered, his ankles ached, his legs burned, but he didn't stop, because every time he failed, he came closer to something impossible. The people around him didn't understand at first. They saw him walking backward in socks across polished floors. They saw him sliding across studio stages, stopping, starting, trying again. They heard the music stop and start repeatedly as he refined timing down to fractions of a second. But Michael Jackson wasn't dancing. He was engineering an illusion. He was creating a lie so beautiful that the world would believe it. 3 months after James Brown's birthday celebration, the world gathered again. This time not in a ballroom, but in living rooms. Television sets across America glowed as millions tuned in to watch Motown 25, yesterday, today, forever. It was a celebration of the label that shaped modern music. The Supremes, the Temptations, Stevie Wonder, Marvin Gaye, and closing the show, Michael Jackson. But he wasn't there to perform as part of the Jackson 5. He was there to perform alone. As the music cue began, the audience saw a familiar figure step into the spotlight. Black pants, white socks, black loafers, a sequin jacket that caught the light like a constellation, a single white glove. The beat dropped, and the world changed. At first, it looked like a normal performance. Michael Jackson stood still, listening to the opening bars of Billie Jean, body poised like a coiled spring. Then he moved, sharp, precise, every pop and lock landing exactly on beat. The audience cheered. But then, he did it. He stepped backward, and didn't stop. His feet slid across the stage as if pulled by invisible strings. His upper body moved forward while his lower body glided backward. He walked without walking. He moved without motion. The audience screamed. People jumped out of their seats. Cameras shook. Gasps echoed through the studio. The impossible had just become visible. The moonwalk. In that moment, Michael Jackson didn't just perform a dance move. He performed a miracle. Millions watching at home sat frozen, eyes wide, mouths open. Children dropped their toys. Parents leaned closer to the screen. Dancers around the world paused their practice sessions, suddenly unsure of what they thought was possible. No one had ever seen anything like this. And the music industry wasn't ready. Because this wasn't just innovation. This was evolution. Behind that glide was the ghost of James Brown's spin. Behind that illusion was the memory of witnessing perfection and choosing not to imitate it, but to transcend it. Michael Jackson had taken inspiration and transformed it into something entirely new. And the world would never move the same way again. But the story doesn't end on that stage. Because the moonwalk wasn't just a dance move. It was a message. It said, you don't have to compete with greatness. You can create your own. From that moment forward, performance art was never the same. Artists stopped thinking only about sound and started thinking about sight, about movement, about illusion, about storytelling through the body. Every pop star who came after, every dancer, every performer, walked in the shadow of that glide. But few people truly understood what that moment cost. Behind the magic was exhaustion. Behind the perfection was pain. Behind the illusion was sacrifice. Michael Jackson didn't sleep much during those months. He isolated himself. He pushed his body beyond comfort. He worked until his feet bled, then wrapped them and continued. He chased a feeling he couldn't describe, only recognize when it arrived. And when it finally did, it didn't feel like triumph. It felt like relief. Relief that he had honored his idol not by copying him, but by expanding what he stood for. James Brown once said, "I'm not just a singer, I'm an entertainer." Michael Jackson took that statement and stretched it across the future. He didn't just entertain. He transformed. But what makes this story truly powerful isn't just the moonwalk. It's the moment that created it. That single spin. That second of silence. That pause in motion. That realization that perfection exists and that it can push you beyond yourself. Because when Michael Jackson stopped dancing that night, he didn't stop being an artist. He started becoming a legend. And in the years that followed, he would continue to redefine what a performance could be. The lean and smooth criminal, the robotic precision of his isolations, the cinematic storytelling of his music videos, the way he turned concerts into theatrical experiences, blending dance, film, music, and emotion into a single, immersive world. But all of it traces back to one moment. May 9, 1983. Beverly Hilton. James Brown's 50th birthday celebration. A spin so smooth that the greatest performer on earth stopped moving. And what he did next shocked the industry forever. Because Michael Jackson didn't try to be better than James Brown. He tried to be impossible. And he succeeded. Today, decades later, dancers still study the moonwalk, still attempt it, still fail at it. Because it's not just about sliding your feet. It's about selling the illusion. It's about making people believe. And belief is the most powerful performance of all. When you watch that Motown 25 performance today, you're not just watching a dance. You're watching a response to witnessing perfection, a response to realizing that greatness doesn't have to be copied. It can be surpassed by becoming something entirely new. Michael Jackson didn't chase James Brown's shadow. He created his own light. And that light continues to shine across generations. Every time someone attempts the moonwalk at a wedding, a school talent show, a concert, a street corner, you are witnessing the echo of that spin. You are witnessing the aftershock of that night. You are witnessing the moment when one artist watched another and chose not to imitate, but to invent. And that is the true story behind the move that changed everything. Not a dance, not a trick, but a transformation. Because witnessing perfection doesn't end creativity. It ignites it. And Michael Jackson proved that the greatest tribute to your idols is not to become them, but to become something they could never have imagined. The ripple of that moment didn't fade after Motown 25. It expanded. It traveled. It seeped into studios, dance floors, and dreams across the world. The moonwalk was no longer just a move. It was a language. And Michael Jackson, its creator, had unknowingly unlocked a new vocabulary for human motion. But behind the spotlight, behind the applause, behind the illusion, there was something deeper happening. Michael wasn't celebrating. He was searching. Because once you touch the impossible, the ordinary no longer satisfies you. In the weeks following Motown 25, journalists flooded his phone lines. Headlines screamed about the gravity-defying dance, the walk that went backward, the moment that broke television. But Michael avoided interviews. He didn't want to explain it. He wanted to understand it. He wanted to know how far the human body and human imagination could go. And that question became his obsession. In rehearsal rooms lit by fluorescent bulbs, far away from screaming crowds and flashing cameras, Michael Jackson continued to refine not just the moonwalk, but the philosophy behind it. He believed that every movement had to mean something. Every gesture had to tell a story. Every performance had to feel like a dream unfolding in real time. He wasn't dancing for applause. He was dancing for transcendence. This mindset changed everything about how he approached music, choreography, and storytelling. Songs were no longer just songs. They were cinematic experiences waiting to be unlocked. Concerts were no longer concerts. They were emotional journeys. Music videos were no longer promotional tools. They were short films, visual poems, mythologies brought to life. And at the center of all of it was motion. Motion that felt unreal. Motion that felt supernatural, motion that made people question what they were seeing. But the truth was far from supernatural. It was discipline. It was pain. It was repetition. It was sacrifice. Michael Jackson trained like an athlete, like a monk, like a scientist. He studied dancers from every culture, every era. He absorbed influences from street dancers, classical ballet, jazz, tap, African rhythms, and mime. He wasn't stealing moves, he was studying movement itself. He dissected the human body into components: ankles, knees, hips, spine, shoulders, neck, fingers. He trained each part to move independently, then taught them to communicate with each other in ways that felt unnatural. He didn't just want to dance. He wanted to reprogram the human body. And that ambition came with a cost. People close to him noticed the toll. He became thinner, quieter, more withdrawn. His sleep patterns grew erratic. His days blurred into nights. Food became secondary. Rest became optional. But in his mind, he wasn't suffering. He was evolving. Because Michael Jackson didn't see himself as a man. He saw himself as a vessel, a channel through which something larger could move. And the moonwalk was only the beginning. As the months turned into years, the ripple from that James Brown moment continued to shape everything Michael touched. When he stepped on stage, he no longer thought in terms of songs. He thought in terms of moments. What is the moment when the audience stops breathing? What is the moment when time freezes? What is the moment when reality bends? Those questions became his compass. And they led him to create performances that didn't just entertain, they haunted. The lean and smooth criminal, a human body tilting forward at an impossible angle, held in defiance of gravity. It wasn't a trick of the camera. It wasn't stage magic. It was biomechanics, engineering, rehearsal, and risk. Once again, Michael Jackson didn't copy. He invented. He worked with engineers to design special shoes that could lock into the stage, allowing him to lean forward beyond the natural center of gravity without falling. But even with the shoes, the move required immense core strength, balance, and precision. It wasn't easy. It was dangerous. And he loved that, because danger made the impossible real. But even as he pushed the boundaries of physical movement, something else was changing. His emotional world. The deeper he went into performance, the further he seemed to drift from ordinary life. Fame isolated him. Success separated him. Childhood slipped away. Privacy vanished. And as the world watched him glide across stages, he often felt like he was floating alone. Yet in that loneliness, he found something powerful. Imagination. Michael Jackson retreated into fantasy, not as an escape but as a source of creation. He surrounded himself with art, films, books, stories, and symbols. He studied mythology, fairy tales, superheroes, science fiction. He didn't just want to be a performer. He wanted to be a story. And that story was shaped by contrast. Light and darkness, innocence and power, vulnerability and strength. This duality became the heart of his artistry. On stage, he was untouchable. Off stage, he was fragile. On stage, he commanded millions. Off stage, he longed for connection. And this tension infused his performances with emotion that couldn't be faked. When he danced, it wasn't just his body moving. It was his soul. And audiences felt it. That's why people cried at his concerts. That's why people fainted. That's why people screamed his name, as if calling for something beyond a human being. Because they weren't just watching Michael Jackson. They were witnessing transformation. But none of this would have happened without that night at the Beverly Hilton. Without that spin. Without that moment when the greatest performer in the world stopped moving. Because sometimes stopping is the beginning. Sometimes silence is louder than sound. Sometimes the most important movement is stillness. That stillness gave Michael space to imagine something new. And imagination gave birth to a legacy. But the world didn't see the struggle behind the genius. They saw the moonwalk and thought it was effortless. They saw the lean and thought it was magic. They saw the precision and thought it was natural. They didn't see the hours of failure. They didn't see the frustration. They didn't see the bruises, the blisters, the exhaustion. They didn't see the moments when he wanted to quit. Because Michael Jackson never let them. He believed that the audience deserved wonder. And wonder requires sacrifice. As the years went on, the industry tried to replicate what he had done. Artists copied his style, his sound, his choreography, his fashion, his music videos. Entire careers were built on echoes of his work. But none of them could recreate the feeling. Because the feeling didn't come from the moves. It came from the intention. Michael Jackson wasn't trying to be cool. He was trying to be true. True to the child who watched James Brown on television and dreamed of dancing like him. True to the teenager who practiced in front of mirrors, perfecting every step. True to the young man who stood in the shadows of the Beverly Hilton and watched his idol spin. True to the artist who realized that copying perfection would never satisfy him. He wanted to go beyond. And beyond is a lonely place. But it's also where legends live. As his career continued, the stakes grew higher. Each performance had to be bigger. Each album had to be better. Each moment had to top the last. The pressure was immense. The expectations were crushing. And yet, Michael Jackson continued to deliver. Bad. Dangerous. HI Story. Each era brought new sounds, new visuals, new movements, new ideas. Each era pushed boundaries. Each era shocked the industry. But at the core of it all was the same philosophy born that night in 1983. Witness perfection, then create transcendence. That philosophy didn't just change music. It changed culture, fashion, dance, film, advertising, even sports. Athletes began to study his footwork. Directors began to study his framing. Designers began to study his silhouettes. His influence became so vast that it became invisible, woven into the fabric of modern entertainment. And yet the man himself remained a mystery. Behind the masks, behind the costumes, behind the headlines, behind the controversies, behind the rumors, behind the myths, there was still that boy from Gary, Indiana. The boy who watched James Brown and dreamed. The boy who stood still and imagined something impossible. The boy who decided not to follow in footsteps, but to create footprints of his own. That boy became Michael Jackson. And that boy changed the world. But to truly understand the impact of that night, we have to understand what James Brown represented to Michael. James wasn't just a performer. He was a force. He was discipline. He was work ethic. He was control. He was rhythm. He was survival. He came from poverty, struggle, pain, and turned it into power. He took hardship and turned it into movement. He took suffering and turned it into sound. He took chaos and turned it into structure. And Michael Jackson saw that. He didn't just see the dance. He saw the story. He saw the resilience. He saw the hunger. He saw the fight. And that's why that spin mattered so much. Because it wasn't just technically perfect. It was spiritually complete. It represented a lifetime of struggle distilled into one flawless movement. And when Michael witnessed that, he didn't feel small. He felt challenged. Not to compete, but to grow. And growth requires breaking. Breaking habits. Breaking expectations. Breaking patterns. Breaking comfort. Breaking the past. Michael Jackson broke all of it. He broke the mold of what a pop star could be. He broke the rules of how music videos were made. He broke the boundaries between genres. He broke the idea that dance was secondary to music. He broke gravity. And in breaking, he created. This is the paradox of creativity. You must destroy in order to build. And Michael was willing to destroy everything he thought he knew about performance. Because he had seen what perfection looked like. And he wanted to go beyond it. But beyond perfection is not beauty. It's terror. Because once you reach perfection, there are no rules left. Only risk. And risk is where genius lives. Michael embraced that risk. He leaned into it. He danced on it. He balanced on it. He glided across it. He built a career on it. But that risk also consumed him. The pressure to constantly reinvent. The fear of becoming repetitive. The anxiety of losing relevance. The isolation of being misunderstood. The weight of being the greatest. All of it took a toll. And yet, even as the world criticized him, judged him, misunderstood him, he never stopped creating. He never stopped dancing. He never stopped imagining. Because creation was his survival. Dance was his language. Movement was his prayer. And the moonwalk was his first miracle. Everything after that was an echo. But echoes fade. Legends remain. Today, when you watch that Motown 25 performance, it still feels unreal. Not because of the move, but because of the moment. Because you're not just watching a dance. You're watching a turning point. A fork in the road of cultural history. One path led to imitation. The other led to innovation. And Michael Jackson chose innovation. That choice didn't just change his life. It changed ours. It changed how we see movement. It changed how we experience music. It changed how we define performance. It changed how we dream. Because if a human being can walk backward while moving forward, then what else is possible? If gravity can be questioned, then what else can be challenged? If reality can be bent, then what else can be reimagined? These are not dance questions. These are human questions. And Michael Jackson answered them with motion. But the story doesn't stop there. Because the true legacy of that night is not the moonwalk. It's the mindset. The mindset that says, when you witness greatness, don't worship it. Learn from it. The mindset that says, when you encounter perfection, don't copy it. Transcend it. The mindset that says, when you feel small, don't shrink. Expand. The mindset that says, when you are challenged, don't retreat. Invent. That mindset lives on. In dancers, in musicians, in filmmakers, in artists, in anyone who has ever felt inspired by someone greater than themselves and chose not to imitate, but to innovate. That mindset is the real moonwalk. And it began with a spin. A single flawless spin. On May 9th, 1983. At the Beverly Hilton. During James Brown's 50th birthday celebration. When Michael Jackson stopped dancing and started changing the world. But to fully grasp the magnitude of what happened next, we must step inside Michael's mind during those 3 months between the Beverly Hilton and Motown 25. Those months were not just preparation. They were transformation. They were the cocoon. Michael was not just refining a move. He was shedding an identity. He had already conquered pop music. He had already become a global phenomenon. He had already achieved what most artists only dream of. But that night made him realize something terrifying. He had peaked. And for someone like Michael Jackson, peaking was unacceptable. He didn't want to be remembered as someone who reached the top and stayed there. He wanted to keep climbing, even if there was nowhere left to go. So he created somewhere. He created a new dimension of performance. But creating a new dimension means leaving the old one behind. And that meant letting go of safety, letting go of formulas, letting go of expectations, letting go of comfort, letting go of applause, letting go of approval. Because innovation is lonely, and loneliness is painful. But Michael chose pain, because pain meant growth, and growth meant evolution. This is the part of the story that is rarely told. Not the applause, not the headlines, not the fame, but the silence, the isolation, the internal struggle, the doubt, the fear, the question, what if I fail? And the answer, what if I don't try? Michael tried. He failed. He tried again. He failed again. He tried again. Until failure transformed into illusion. Until illusion transformed into magic. Until magic transformed into legend. And that legend transformed into legacy. But the legacy is not just Michael's. It belongs to everyone who dares to imagine something impossible. It belongs to everyone who witnesses greatness and chooses not to imitate it, but to surpass it in their own way. It belongs to everyone who has ever stopped in awe and then moved in courage. It belongs to everyone who has ever felt small and chosen to grow. That is the true gift of that night. Not a dance move, but a philosophy of transcendence. And that philosophy is embodied in one name: Michael Jackson. But let's return to that moment one more time, because it deserves to be seen again. The ballroom is filled with light. The audience is filled with legends. The band is filled with rhythm. James Brown is filled with fire. And in the shadows, Michael Jackson is filled with wonder. The music plays. The body moves. The spin happens. Time stops. Breath stops. Motion stops. And in that stillness, a new future is born. Not in noise. Not in applause. Not in celebration. But in silence. In stillness. In awe. Because awe is the birthplace of innovation. And innovation is the birthplace of legacy. Michael didn't clap. He didn't cheer. He didn't dance. He watched. And in watching, he learned. In learning, he imagined. In imagining, he created. In creating, he changed the world. This is not just a story about dance. It's a story about what happens when one human being witnesses the peak of another human being's potential and decides not to compete, but to evolve. This is a story about humility. This is a story about ambition. This is a story about transformation. This is a story about transcendence. This is a story about Michael Jackson. And it all began with a spin. But the spin didn't just turn James Brown's body. It turned Michael's destiny. And through Michael, it turned ours. Because every time you see someone moonwalk, you are not just seeing a dance. You are seeing a decision. A decision to go beyond what exists. A decision to create what doesn't. A decision to turn inspiration into innovation. A decision to transform awe into art. That decision is the real legacy. That decision is the real miracle. That decision is the real moonwalk. And it belongs to Michael Jackson. But it also belongs to you. Because every one of us stands in the wings of someone else's greatness at some point in our lives. Every one of us witnesses someone who makes us stop. Every one of us feels small in the presence of someone extraordinary. And in that moment, we have a choice. We can imitate, or we can innovate. We can copy, or we can create. We can shrink, or we can grow. Michael chose growth. Michael chose creation. Michael chose transcendence. And in doing so, he gave us permission to do the same. That is the true story behind the move that changed everything. Not a dance, not a trick, not a performance, but a transformation. And transformations don't end. They ripple. They expand. They evolve. They live on. In us. In art. In culture. In memory. In motion. In silence. In stillness. In awe. In courage. In imagination. In legacy. In Michael Jackson. And in the spin that started it all. If this story moved you, if it made you feel the electricity of that moment, if it reminded you why art matters, why imagination matters, why courage matters, subscribe, like, and share this story so more people can experience the untold journey of Michael Jackson and the moment that changed performance forever.